What if I told you that some of America's most trusted companies, the brands you grew up with, the stores you walked through for decades, the products sitting in your kitchen right now are far closer to collapse than anyone wants to admit? It sounds unthinkable, but in 2025, the unthinkable is already happening. Across the country, a quiet economic shift is reshaping everyday life. Parking lots that were once full on Saturday mornings now sit half empty. Long-standing pharmacies have gone dark without warning. Home goods stores that define suburban living are filing last-minute bankruptcy notices. And behind these closures lies a pattern so widespread that analysts are calling it the defining corporate story of the year. U.S. Bankruptcies 2025. The pressure is everywhere. Operating costs are at record highs. Consumer spending among older Americans has tightened to the essentials. Debt that once felt manageable has become a ticking clock. And as online shopping pulls more revenue away from physical storefronts, many of the companies at risk are discovering a painful truth. Tradition nostalgia and brand loyalty are no longer enough to survive. What's collapsing isn't just retail. It's a piece of American routine. The stores we relied on, the brands we trusted, the places that made everyday life feel stable. In this countdown, we're breaking down 10 household names struggling hardest right now. And by the time we reach number 1, you may never look at your own neighborhood the same way again. Number 10, iRoot Roomba. When the first Roomba entered American homes in 2002, it felt like a small miracle. A robot quietly taking care of chores while families went on with their day. But by 2025, the company behind that innovation is facing a financial reality far tougher than most people realize. In its most recent filings, iRoot reported a 39% year-over-year drop in revenue, falling to around $884 million, the weakest performance the company has seen in nearly 10 years. Losses deepened to over $280 million, and the most troubling figure appeared on the balance sheet: less than $25 million in available cash. For a hardware manufacturer with global operations, that number raised immediate red flags across the industry. The failed $1.4 billion Amazon acquisition was a severe blow. The deal would have erased long-term debt and guaranteed new investment. Instead, iRoot was left to compete against brands like Roborock and Eovax, whose comparable models now sell for 30 to 50% less, a price gap iRoot simply cannot match. While component and shipping costs remain elevated, consumer behavior has shifted to battery replacements can exceed $70. Many repairs cost over $150, and a growing number of households are choosing cheaper alternatives rather than upgrading to premium Roomba models. With shrinking revenue, rising costs, and no strategic buyer waiting in the wings, analysts warn that iRoot's next year will be defined by difficult decisions, from deeper restructuring to potential asset sales. Number 9, Fat Brands, Fatburger, Johnny Rockets, Twin Peaks. Fatburger, Johnny Rockets, and Twin Peaks may look like 3 very different restaurants, but behind all of them is a single company now burdened by one of the heaviest debt loads in the entire casual dining sector. For years, Fat Brands expanded rapidly through acquisitions, a strategy that brought in familiar American eateries, but also stacked up liabilities faster than revenue could catch up. By 2025, the numbers had become impossible to overlook. Fat Brands disclosed a debt load of roughly $1.3 billion, a figure extraordinarily high for a company of its size. Interest expenses alone surged past $100 million, annually consuming cash that once supported store operations and franchise growth. At one point, the company reported having only a few $million in unrestricted cash, raising doubts about its ability to meet near-term obligations. Rising costs have made the situation worse. Commodity prices for beef, poultry, and cooking oil climbed to between 15% and 25% over the past 2 years. Insurance premiums, especially for late-night and alcohol-serving restaurants, jumped sharply. Labor shortages pushed wages up by 10 to 14% across several major markets. For franchise owners operating on thin margins, the math no longer worked. Some locations have already shuttered, others have reduced hours or cut staff to stay afloat. Customers in multiple states have noticed slower service, smaller teams, and dining rooms far quieter than they were just a few years ago. Credit analysts now list Fat Brands as highly distressed, noting that without major refinancing or the sale of key assets, the company may struggle to keep parts of its restaurant portfolio intact. Number 8, Forever 21. For many Americans, Forever 21 was the beating heart of them all. It was loud, bright, overflowing with inventory, and packed with teenagers hunting for the newest Friday night outfit. But the crowds that once filled those yellow bag aisles have thinned dramatically, and the company's financial picture has darkened even faster. In 2025, F21 OpCo, the operator of Forever 21 stores in the United States, entered Chapter 11 for the second time in 6 years, citing sustained drops in foot traffic and rising operational costs. Court filings revealed plans to shut down more than 350 stores if a buyer couldn't be secured. Sales that once exceeded $4 billion annually peaked long ago. By 2023, revenue had slipped below $2 billion and margins grew increasingly unstable as shipping labor and mall rents climbed. Competition has been unforgiving. Ultra fashion platforms like Shein and Temu now undercut Forever 21 by 40 to 70% on similar items. While TikTok-driven micro-trends shift too quickly for traditional retail supply chains to follow. Meanwhile, mall visitation nationwide has declined by over 20% compared with pre-pandemic levels, erasing the foot traffic the brand relied on for decades. Inside many stores, the signs are unmistakable. Reduce staffing, vast clearance sections, and entire floors closed to cut utility costs. Former employees report shrinking shipments and bare-bones inventories designed simply to keep locations open until decisions from lenders and landlords become final forever. 21's struggle isn't just about fashion. It's a clear snapshot of a retail model aging out of relevance where the mall itself is no longer the cultural anchor it once was. Number 7. At Home. For years, At Home felt almost endless. A decor warehouse where 20 aisles of lamps, rugs, mirrors, and wall art stretched farther than most people's living rooms ever could. It was the kind of store suburban families visited for inspiration, not just for bargains. But behind those massive showrooms is a financial model that has cracked under the weight of inflation debt and shrinking discretionary spending. In mid-2025, At Home filed for Chapter 11, revealing nearly $2 billion in total debt, much of it stemming from a leverage buyout completed shortly before the pandemic and inflationary spike. The company began closing 26 stores immediately, with more closures under evaluation as lenders pushed for cash preservation. Same-store sales have fallen in multiple consecutive quarters, and inventory turnover has slowed to its weakest pace since the early 2010s. Operating a store the size of a football field has become increasingly difficult. Utility costs for lighting and climate control have risen by 15 to 20% since 2021. Freight costs, despite easing slightly, remain 30% higher than pre-pandemic averages. Meanwhile, average basket size has dropped as Americans cut back on non-essential home decor purchases. In surveys, nearly half of shoppers now categorize At Home's core items as delayable, a dangerous label in a high-cost retail environment. Inside the remaining stores, you can see the strain. Seasonal sections shrink, staffing thins out, and formerly packed aisles feel unusually quiet. For many longtime customers, the magic of affordable transformation simply doesn't stretch as far as it used to. With debts mounting and consumer demand softening, At Home's future depends on whether it can adapt its oversized format to a market increasingly favoring smaller, cheaper, more flexible retail footprints. Number 6. Value City, American Signature Furniture. For millions of families across the Midwest and East Coast, Value City and American Signature Furniture weren't just stores, they were milestones. The first apartment sofa, the kitchen table where kids did homework, the recliner that followed someone into retirement. These brands built their reputation on affordability and reliability, not flash. But by 2025, even that reliability has hit a breaking point. The company behind both brands posted a dramatic decline in revenue, falling from roughly $1.1 billion in 2023 to about $83 million. Within 2 years, a drop of nearly 27%. Losses exceeded $70 million, and by late 2025, the company entered Chapter 11, listing more than $350 million in liabilities. As part of the restructuring, at least 30 to 50 stores across multiple states have begun liquidation or are slated for closure. Operational pressures mounted quickly. Furniture freight costs have risen by 20 to 25% since the pandemic. Foam and wood materials remain elevated, and warehousing expenses have climbed as industrial rents hit new highs in several markets, with the U.S. housing market cooling home sales down across much of 2024 and early 2025. Demand for large-ticket furniture items has weakened significantly inside surviving locations. Long aisles once filled with full-room displays now appear noticeably sparse. Clearance tags dominate. Customers browse but don't buy, often checking online competitors offering similar pieces with faster shipping and lower overhead. For communities that relied on these stores as their affordable furnishing option, each closure leaves a noticeable gap, one not easily filled by higher-priced national chains. Number 5. Big Lots. For decades, Big Lots filled a space few retailers understood the middle ground between bargain hunting and everyday practicality. It was where a family could walk in with $50 and walk out with groceries, cleaning supplies, a new throw pillow, and maybe a small piece of furniture. For older Americans especially, Big Lots symbolized value without embarrassment. But by 2025, the numbers behind that familiar orange logo paint a very different picture. The chain's financial pressure escalated quickly. In 2024 alone, Big Lots closed more than 500 stores, one of the largest mass shutdowns in recent retail history. Revenue fell double digits for multiple quarters, and inventory shrink driven by theft and supply chain mismatches eroded margins already tightened by inflation. When the company finally entered Chapter 11, filings showed nearly 1,400 nationwide locations at risk, and restructuring plans soon shifted toward broad liquidation. Cost pressures slammed the business from every angle. Freight expenses remained 30% above pre-pandemic levels. Utilities for large format stores rose 15% in several regions. Insurance premiums in high theft markets climbed sharply. Meanwhile, consumer behavior changed. Categories like home decor and seasonal goods, once Big Lots profit engines, fell sharply as shoppers restricted budgets to food and essentials. The emotional impact in smaller towns has been immediate. After a Big Lots closure, entire shopping plazas struggled to attract new tenants, reducing foot traffic and leaving empty storefronts that sit dark for months. For millions of Americans who depended on Big Lots to stretch limited incomes, the store's retreat signals more than a retail problem. It reflects a widening affordability gap, reshaping daily routines. Number 4. Tupperware. For more than 70 years, Tupperware lived at the center of American home life. The pastel bowls in the fridge, the stack of containers brought to church potlucks. The neighborhood parties where people laughed, snacked, and learned which lid fit which bowl. For many older Americans, Tupperware wasn't just plastic. It was a ritual. But by 2025, the company behind those memories is fighting through one of the steepest financial crises in its history. In late 2024, Tupperware filed for Chapter 11, revealing more than $812 million in debt and acknowledging substantial doubt about its ability to continue operating without major restructuring. Revenue has fallen steadily for years, dropping below $1.2 billion, nearly half of what the company generated a decade earlier. Global sales declined 30% over recent reporting periods, reflecting a collapse in the direct sales model once synonymous with the brand. Competition has reshaped the landscape. Retailers like Walmart and Target now offer inexpensive containers at 20 to 40% lower prices, and higher-end consumers have shifted to glass and silicone alternatives. Meanwhile, the number of active Tupperware sellers in the U.S., once measured in the tens of thousands, has fallen dramatically as online retail eclipses traditional party-based sales. Even loyal customers have noticed changes. Thinner plastic, inconsistent quality, and fewer locally hosted demonstrations. Tupperware's ongoing restructuring will determine whether the brand can reclaim its footing or whether an iconic piece of American kitchen culture becomes another chapter in retail history. Number 3. Rite Aid. For generations, Rite Aid was the neighborhood stop that required no explanation, the place where prescriptions were refilled, family photos were printed, and late-night essentials could be bought without driving across town. But by 2025, one of America's most recognizable pharmacy chains is wrestling with financial strain that has pushed it far beyond ordinary cost-cutting. In its latest restructuring, Rite Aid entered Chapter 11 for the second time in less than 2 years, disclosing liabilities that stretch into the billions of dollars. The company has already closed hundreds of stores, and filings indicate that more locations remain under review as part of an aggressive plan to stabilize operations. Shrinking front-end sales, declining prescription volumes in certain regions, and legal liabilities tied to opioid-related claims have added significant pressure. Some court documents reference potential exposure of more than $3 billion connected to litigation costs. Operational challenges have compounded the situation. Pharmacy staffing shortages led wage expenses to rise 10 to 12%. And theft in urban markets pushed shrink rates well above historical averages. Several states reported store closures, leaving communities with dramatically reduced access to walk-in healthcare, especially in rural areas where Rite Aid served as the only nearby pharmacy. Inside remaining locations, the strain is visible. Fewer pharmacists per shift, longer wait times, and shelves protected. Behind plexiglass as a response to loss prevention. Customers accustomed to quick errand stops now find limited hours and reduced services. Rite Aid's restructuring is expected to reshape large parts of its national footprint. And for many neighborhoods, each closing represents not just the loss of a store, but the disappearance of a local healthcare anchor. Number 2, QVC-HSN Curate Retail Group. For millions of older Americans, QVC and HSN were more than shopping networks. They were familiar. Voices, the hosts felt like friends. The product Dimas felt personal. Vin Hung Boy, Toyoy, Kane, Voten, Troth, and Toy Quinn. But behind that comfort is a company now facing one of the toughest financial battles in its 4-decade history. Curate Retail Group, the parent company of QVC and HSN, has spent the past several years fighting declining viewership and rising costs. By 2025, the company's debt had swelled to nearly $7 billion, while revenue slipped below $12 billion, down significantly from its peak earlier in the decade. Credit agencies placed Kate deep into distressed territory with multiple downgrades, citing heightened bankruptcy risk over the next 12 to 24 months. Viewership is the heart of the problem. Traditional cable audiences, once QVC and HSN's strongest demographic, have fallen by more than 25% since 20,209 as millions of households cut the cord. Operating expenses have risen at the same time. Shipping costs up 30% compared with pre-pandemic norms, warehouse labor up 10 to 14%. And returns, always a costly part of TV retail, consuming an even larger share of revenue. In several earnings reports, management acknowledged material uncertainty about the company's long-term outlook. Thousands of employees were laid off in restructuring moves, and QVC quietly scaled back live hours production in multiple markets to reduce costs. For loyal viewers, the change is unmistakable. Fewer live shows, fewer familiar hosts, and a growing sense that the company is shrinking its once sprawling presence just to stay afloat. Kate's next steps will likely determine whether these two historic networks can reinvent themselves or gradually fade into a digital landscape they helped create. Number 1, Jo-Ann. For generations of Americans, Jo-Ann was more than a craft store. It was a community space. It was where parents bought fabric for Halloween costumes, where retirees learned quilting and backroom classes, where church groups stocked up on supplies for charity projects. You didn't just shop at Jo-Ann, you built something there. But by 2025, that familiar green and white storefront has become one of the most significant retail closures of the decade. In early 2025, Jo-Ann filed for Chapter 11 for the second time in just 12 months, revealing liabilities in the hundreds of millions and a restructuring plan that ultimately couldn't save the business. By spring, the company announced it would close every one of its roughly 800 stores nationwide, one of the largest specialty retail shutdowns in modern U.S. history. Same-store sales had been declining for years, and the pandemic craft boom, which briefly lifted revenue above $2.3 billion, faded rapidly afterward. Heavy debt from a past leverage payout left Jo-Ann with interest obligations that climbed as rates rose. Freight costs spiked more than 20%, cotton and synthetic material prices climbed, and foot traffic never fully recovered. The shift to online crafting, with discount suppliers selling thread, yarn, and tools at 30 to 40%, lower prices further eroded Jo-Ann's margins. The human impact has been substantial. Entire sewing communities are losing their gathering places. Thousands of long-tenured employees, many with 15, 20, even 30 years at the company, now face store closures. And for smaller towns, losing a Jo-Ann means losing one of the last remaining specialty retailers that supported local schools, hobbyists, and small businesses. Jo-Ann's disappearance marks a turning point, a reminder that even deeply rooted, highly loved American brands are not guaranteed a future when cost pressures rise and consumer habits shift. Across these 10 companies, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Rising operating costs, utilities up double digits, insurance premiums at record levels. Labor expenses climbing year after year have pushed long-standing retailers into territory they were never built to survive. At the same time, consumer habits have shifted sharply. Older Americans are shopping less often, buying fewer non-essentials, and relying more on online alternatives. In this environment, U.S. Bankruptcies 2025 isn't an isolated event. It reflects a broader transformation in how the country spends, works, and maintains its daily routines. For communities losing these stores, the impact is real. Longer drives for medicine, fewer affordable decor options, and the quiet disappearance of businesses that once felt permanent. Many of these companies at risk may eventually restructure and return. Others may not. What matters now is understanding how quickly the landscape is changing and how close the next closure might be to your own neighborhood. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, stay with us. There is far more unfolding across America's economy than most people realize. Actually restructure and return, others may not. What matters now is understanding how quickly the landscape is changing and how close the next closure might be to your own neighborhood. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, stay with us. There is far more unfolding across America's economy than most people realize.